Honorable the Deputy Speaker.
As we resume, I'll recognize the member for Couva South, and you have 22 minutes of your initial time. Kindly proceed.
20 minutes, Mr.
22
Deputy.
minutes of your initial time.
Okay, thank you.
Then plus you'll have your additional once you deserve it. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Before we took the break, I was really responding to the member for Tobago East during her presentation, and when she took the opportunity to indicate to the national community that as a result of the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, that life in Tobago was improving, people were living healthier and happier lives and so on. And I pointed her in the direction of the collapse of the Sandals project and the collapse of the Sea Bridge, and in fact, the acquisition of the Galleons Passage has not in the best way improved the reliability of the service between Trinidad and Tobago, because at the end of the day, rough seas and so on has resulted in tremendous cancellation on the domestic sea bridge. And also, as it relates to the air bridge, I am advised that only yesterday that the Tobago Tourism Association called for a meeting with CAL to discuss airlift and the unavailability of flights and so on. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the facts are that the incompetence and the lack of delivery continues into their fourth year of government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the member for Tobago East went on to indicate that the Prime Minister, the Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West, goes out and engages people and engages the public. Well, yes, I may want to admit that to an extent, but is the level of conversation that the Prime Minister engages in when he goes out into the public. Because when you go in the direction of speaking about golf courses and going out to putting women out to pasture and comparing that for the need for pruning and so on, that tells me that the Prime Minister in his engagement really does not focus on lifting the self-esteem of the national community, and more importantly,
Order 48-1, please.
Again, member, as prior to the tea break, again, tie in your point quickly, and it's not a debate on those issues. Tie in your point and be relevant, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I was simply minding the people's business in relation to what the Prime Minister said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I take your advice and I move on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I also want to take the opportunity here because there is a continuation of this narrative about this government being responsible and also focusing on the development of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And the honorable member for St. Joseph, the Minister of Health, during his input into the debate, indicated to the national community, and he focused on a number of accomplishments on behalf of the People's National Movement. And he indicated that they paid, or the government paid, $5 billion in back pay, which was gifted to the incoming government. And also, we have kept public servants on the payroll. Not one public servant have been, has been laid off. Look at Barbados, 3,500 in a more smaller service and so on. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to point the member for St. Joseph in a particular direction, because in this, during his presentation to the Prime Minister indicated, and I want to quote directly when he, during his address, let me come to employment, because you see there are some people who have no regards for numbers and truths. I heard a gentleman from the Parliament telling the country that this government has got rid of 50,000 jobs and so on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And today, I just want to take the opportunity, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because during his address, he indicated that the government had, or he admitted that there was the loss of over 21,000 jobs from a statistical point of view. And at the end of the day, the Prime Minister would have failed to take into consideration the 9,000 jobs that were lost at Petrotrin, the 631 at TSTT, and the fact that employers, because of the lack of growth, the lack of confidence in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, and the stagnation of the economy, that employers have been sending home persons very quietly, exploiting the loophole within the law where they are not mandated or they are not required to send home. When they send home less than 5 persons, they do not have to formally advise or provide any formal correspondence to the Minister of Labour and Enterprise Development, Madam Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sorry. And just for the records, because we must never forget, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that before this government came into political power, via their manifesto and via their memorandum of understanding, which was signed with the labor movement prior to the general election of 2015, they campaigned on diversification of the economy, creation of jobs within the economy. And I want to quote directly to tell you that, that they would have concentrated on a timely settlement of all outstanding public sector salary and wage negotiations and promoting sustainable economic growth and so on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But just to remind all and sundry that there have been job losses at the Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Tobago Development, Repsol, Industrial Plant Services, ArcelorMittal, where over 764 workers who were directly employed at ArcelorMittal and 2,000 workers in relation to subcontractors or contractors who provided direct services to ArcelorMittal. Over 2,000 workers lost their jobs. And I could go on and on in terms of the seafood industry, Caroni Green, CPEP, BHP Billiton, Unilever, UTT, and the list goes on and on. So from that angle, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thought that the Prime Minister, during his presentation, would have seized the opportunity to offer hope to the 50,000 persons who would have lost their jobs within the economy of the country. And when I say hope, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thought that the Prime Minister would have used or seized the opportunity to say that we will be embarking on a series of initiatives that would create what we would call, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he would have acknowledged the fact that families and workers would have been destabilized and traumatized, and as such, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he would have seized the opportunity to focus on the future of work and the world of work in this country. And where he would have, into his 4th year in office, he would have been speaking of achievement and building on a platform for his 5th year being the Prime Minister and being the government of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and focusing on technological advances, focusing on artificial intelligence, automation, robotics that will create new jobs for those who have lost their jobs. And in the transitioning process, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he would have said to the country that we are in the digital age. We are in the age of the 4th Industrial Revolution, and this is something that the leader of the opposition, when she was the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, championed in terms of creating opportunities for the school children of this country through the distribution of laptops and so on. Over 95,000 laptops, preparing the current school population for the future of work in terms of the development of the digital platform and so on. That has been the focus, and I thought that the Prime Minister lost a golden opportunity to focus on, creating hope and alternatives for the persons who would have lost their jobs, who are transitioning, and those who are emerging out of the secondary school system and the tertiary level education system in Trinidad and Tobago. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we focus on the whole question of unemployment and the data, we may continue to debate about the numbers that have gone home, and we may continue to disagree. But when a government is elected into office, the Prime Minister has a responsibility to display leadership, to display visioning, and in that regard, to lay the platform for the creation of jobs and to expand the economy and so on. And this leads me to the very important issue, Mr. Deputy Speaker. 50,000 people have lost their jobs and so on. 50,000 people are no longer contributing to the national insurance system of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I thought that the Prime Minister would have offered words of comfort in relation to what is the current status of the national insurance system of Trinidad and Tobago, and to say to those employees who would have lost their jobs that the contribution or their contributions to the national insurance system is well protected and well safeguarded in terms of when they realize or reach the retirement age of 60 years, that there would be the existence of the national insurance system. Yes. Because at the end of the day, within recent times, we would have heard from the executive management of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, and more precisely, the executive director, who said that if there is not radical transformation of the national insurance system by 2020, the fund could collapse and it could go into oblivion by 2029, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I want to say that the Prime Minister and even those who are contributing on the other side, they have a responsibility to tell us, because we must never forget that the last time the contribution rate for employers and workers increased was in 2016, and it moved from 12% to 13.2%. And in 2017, the National Insurance Board paid out benefits of $4.6 billion, and it realized $4.2 billion in contributions. And since 2014, the National Insurance Board has been paying out more than it is collecting, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And we today want to know, and not only those who would have lost their jobs, but the existing workforce and the workforce of the future, Mr. Deputy Speaker, would want to know what is the government's position on whether it is increasing contribution rates from 13.2% to 15%. What is the government's position whether it is moving towards a policy of increasing the retirement age from 60 to 65, and whether it is freezing the pension.
Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 48-1, please.
Again, member, tie it in quickly. It's not a debate on the National Insurance Board. So, if you can tie in the point, you have been on that point a little while now. Proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am guided, but again, I, as the Member of Parliament for Couva South, is minding the business of the workers of Trinidad and Tobago and also the future workforce.
Correct.
And based on the data and the employment statistics, if they want me to take the statistics of the Prime Minister that relates to 21,000 people who would have lost their job, the 21,000 people want to know in 2029 whether the national insurance system will be existing, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I have a responsibility to ask and inquire on behalf, what is the government's position on if the government is adopting a policy of freezing the national insurance retirement
Speaker,
pension?
Standing Order 48-1. Thank you.
And again, member, the point has been made. You have spent a couple minutes on that particular point, and all I'm saying is to tie it in, and you can move on to your next point.
And thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And just to wind up on whether the government is going to amend the legislation which will allow the National Insurance Board to invest more than 20% of its portfolio outside of Trinidad and Tobago. These are fundamental issues that people want information on, and that is why I thought the Prime Minister would have used the opportunity to inform the public rather than engage in a blame game and blame Kamla and blame the UNC for their misdemeanors and their lack of direction in terms of governing Trinidad and Tobago since September of 2015, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the end of the day, too, I thought, because the Prime Minister spent extensively in terms of time to deal with Petrotrin, and also the Minister of Health during his presentation too, during this debate, he indicated that the government did the right thing, the most progressive thing as it relates to in terms of closing Petrotrin and forming the new entities and so on. And I thought that in reporting to the nation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the Prime Minister would have told us of the names and the directors and the qualifications of the new entities that were the successor companies to Petrotrin. And I thought that the Prime Minister, who went to a meeting in somewhere in El Dorado and said that the numbers in terms of job losses were not significant or was not important. And then he went down to a public meeting in Marabella, at the Marabella Community Center, I think. Yeah. And he promised the ex-workers of Petrotrin, or the former workers of Petrotrin, that they would get lands, they would be made shareholders in the successor companies, and that in the 1,000 workers that would have been re-employed in these successor companies, that priority would be given to nationals or the former employees of Petrotrin. And I thought that at that point in time, the Prime Minister lost a golden opportunity to report back to the nation to say that we have recruited X number of persons who are former employees of Petrotrin, you will now be able to invest your severance packages and so on into the new entities from a shareholding point of view and so on. And also, the Prime Minister would have pointed in a direction as it relates to land development and so on for the former employees. And I want to warn the former employees of Petrotrin, do not fall for the propaganda. Do not fall for the mama guy, because at the end of the day, in spite of an existing industrial court judgment between the Old Trinidad Union and the former employees of Caroni 1975 Limited, they are still waiting on a total delivery of their entitlements from a land point of view, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And they could get up and say what they want after. I want to remind them, and it is important, Ruka Maloney, let me put the data to you, because when you belonged to the government of Prime Minister...
Please, address the chair. Address the chair.
When you belonged to the cabinet of Prime Minister Patrick Manning, it was between 2003 to 2010, your government delivered 0 residential lots and 115 agricultural lots. And you appealed, the government which you belong to, appealed the Lennox Indarsingh judgment all the way to the Privy Council, and it was only when the government of Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Bisasa came into office, within 100 days of coming to office, that the injunction was lifted and the wheels began to turn again, and it is that facilitated.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 48-1. It was not in the government between 2007 and 2010.
Well, again, well, remember, you stand by. Whatever you say, you're responsible for it.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, if the member for Ruka Maloney was not a member of the cabinet, she was probably a lifelong, she's a long-standing and a lifelong member of the People's National Movement, and you subscribe to the anti-worker, anti-union policies of the PNM government.
Okay, member. Member, your initial 30 minutes has now expired. You have an additional 15. Do you care to avail yourself? Right, okay, proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a government.
Silence.
This is a government does not like to hear.
Silence on the government side, please. Mr.
Deputy Speaker, this is a government that cannot deal with the reality. This is a government that is out of touch. And at the end of the day, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is why I will warn.
1 second, 1 second. Right, the members on the lower front bench of the government side, please. I would not tolerate the crosstalk across the chamber. Kindly proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, they are a very hypocritical bunch, you know. They have a very short history.
Members, please. I know we just resumed from tea, so I know the sugar level may be a little high, but please, there's a certain decorum that goes with your presence in this chamber. So again, member, I think you can rephrase, use a better word, please, hypocritical. Kindly withdraw and use a different term.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Speaker, they are a very disingenuous bunch. Mr.
Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 48-6. We did not throw out Pandey from Re-Entry Complex. They threw out Pandey. We didn't throw out Pandey. We not disingenuous.
Again, members, the member for Kufa South will be responsible for his words. Kindly proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I just want to throw back their minds. Some of them participated. Mr. Deputy Speaker, some of them knew and silently stood by when Mr. Patrick Manning, former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, was unceremoniously asked to...
Overruled. Proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, and that is why they cannot deal with the reality. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to take the opportunity here again because this is a government through the Minister of Finance and all those who have contributed to this debate has attempted again to tell the population that they are doing more with reduced revenue and so on. And I want to ask the country whether acquiring paintings to the value of $3 million was in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago who cannot access basic health care when they go to the Freeport Health Center and the Couva District Health Center and when they go to the San Fernando General Hospital and so on. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to know whether spending $500,000 on a FET or so-called disease was doing more with little, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what was the cost or what was the benefit to the people of Trinidad and Tobago when they took $30 million and gave it as a loan to a toilet paper factory, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And up till today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have not been told whether that particular loan has been repaid, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I also want to ask, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what has been the returns to the taxpaying public of Trinidad and Tobago since this government has found in excess of 200...
Member, please 1 second. Minister of Finance and member for Couva North, you all are free to exit the chamber and have your discourse. Right? Nice. Anytime you all desire. Okay, members, silence. Proceed.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I said, this government found approximately $240 million to acquire masses communication. And up till today, no one on that side can justify, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Speaker, Standing Order 48-6. It's not true.
Again, members, in the circumstances, the member for Couva South knows the standing order procedures and you take ownership for everything that comes out of your mouth, sir. Not so, member? So, based on that, you proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, you see, they are trying to break my trend of thoughts because they don't want to hear. They don't want to hear of the sins and the incompetence of their government. And as I said, nobody knows up till today what is the returns for the taxpaying public in relation to this investment in relation to the acquisition of massive communication, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And in terms of your priorities, you spent over $7 million, I think, to refurbish a pool out at the Hilton, when at a time, constituents of Couva South and surrounding areas, when they go to the San Fernando General Hospital, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they have to spend 3 and 4 and 5 days before they get a bed. In fact, and I challenge the Minister of Health to tell me, that I am not speaking the truth. A constituent of mine from Balmain in December of 2018 died sitting on a chair awaiting a bed 4 days after having been diagnosed with a medical situation. And this is the reality after 4 years of a government led by Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And also the member for St. Joseph indicated, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that ministers in their government have operated above board and in relation to full accountability and transparency and so on. At the end of the day, we know of the scandals, we know of the alleged corruption and so on, which has been engulfing this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And
48.6. That is imputing improper motives in scandals engulfing this government.
Members, please. Again, member, this is the third time I have to rise in order to make sure that you take total ownership for all your comments. Member for Kufa South?
Yes, Mr. Deputy.
All right, proceed.
Because there's a current police investigation as it relates to a $100 million fake oil scandal in relation to AV oil and gas, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We and Petrotrin, we have been told, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that a CCTV contract valued at over $100 million, Mr. Deputy Speaker, whether there was an extension of the bidding process and so on, and whether there was any ministerial interference, Mr. Deputy Speaker. At the end of the day, these are the issues, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and up till today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, over $150,000 of taxpayers' monies was spent as it relates to a sexual harassment fiasco which existed at the Ministry of Sport. And in spite of a commitment that the report in relation to the allegation which transpired at that particular ministry, the Prime Minister gave a commitment that it will be brought out into the full public domain. Still, we are not to be able to read a page or a line of that particular report in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And during their presentation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they have attempted to go again in the direction of saying that the partnership government, which I belong to, and which the member for Superior led in a very productive and visionary manner for 5 years, did not build and did not service the well-being of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, and that the people of Carenage and the people of Point Fortin and the people of Trinidad and Tobago did not benefit. To quote the Prime Minister during his presentation, a small handful of people benefited. Well, I want to remind them again, the Dogomaten Highway was built for the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago. The Chagaramas Boardwalk, the Scarborough Hospital, the primary schools and the constituencies of Degomatin Northeast and Degomatin West, the Degomatin Health Facility, the National Hockey Center, the National Racket Center, the National Cycling Velodrome, the National Aquatic Center. Police stations were built, whether it was at Duncan Street in Port of Spain, at Maloney, at Piaco, at St. Joseph, and so on, down in Point Fortin, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It was in the interest and in the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago, and the PNM has a history, and it is our responsibility to set the record straight that it is the government of Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar which focus on national development in every nook and cranny. So whether it was Cedrus to Palatuvier, or Carigny to Couva, or down in Westmoreland, it was national development, and on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Remember, you have
Mr.
2 more
Deputy
minutes.
Speaker. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I also thought that the Prime Minister would have reported to the workers of this country on the status of the collective bargaining process, because the government of Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar ensured that there was free and fair bargaining process. Yes. We settled 135 negotiations. We raised the minimum wage from $8 to $15 per hour. And up till today, into their 4th year of being the government of Trinidad and Tobago, they cannot tell us how many negotiations that they have settled on behalf of the workers of Trinidad and Tobago. They cannot tell us what is the status of amendments as it relates to important pieces of legislation, such as the Retrenchment and Severance Benefit Act, the Industrial Relations Act, and successor pieces of legislation or accompanying pieces of legislation, in spite of a commitment that was given by the Minister of Labor and Enterprise Development since the days of when the workers lost their jobs at ArcelorMittal and Centrin, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So the only hope for the workers, the only hope for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, from the point of view of people-centered development and human development, and focusing on the future of work to meet the needs of those who would have lost their jobs and those who are emerging out of the working population, or emerging out of the school population of this country into the working environment, is the UNC, led by Kamla Persad-Bissessar. I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize the member for Lupino Bonnet.
Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate this afternoon. And I also want to start off by commending the Prime Minister for providing an opportunity for the government of Trinidad and Tobago to further engage and serve our citizens. Now, the Prime Minister has been meeting with the populace in that, through his conversations with the Prime Minister, but that is really a forum where individuals come with their issues and their questions, and the Prime Minister attends to those. However, the Prime Minister raised the bar to a new level when he decided that he would share information on national issues at the national level, and every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago had an opportunity to be informed and educated. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was initially taken aback by this motion. And the big question for me was, why would an arm of the government, that is the opposition, not want to have a more aware, informed, and knowledgeable citizenry? After all, it is this same opposition, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that consistently accuses the government of not being transparent. It is this same opposition that comes here time after time and indicate the government is not transparent. The Sandals project, they were speaking about that the government wasn't sharing information and the government was lacking in transparency, even with the gas project. So here it is, you have a government and a Prime Minister who has decided that he will share information with the populace, but they have a problem with it. And so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I ask myself, in the absence of information and a public that is not aware or knowledgeable, a void has to be filled. And persons tend to fill that void with fake news or information that is intended to mislead or unsettle the population. And we have experienced that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with this opposition. The Couva Hospital, today, member for Princestown was at pains to explain the difference between commissioning and opening. But they're not fooling anybody because the PP's government position was that they had opened the Couva Hospital. And why is this government not operationalizing it? So to come here today and try to fool people in terms of commissioning versus opening, you're not fooling anybody.
Exactly.
And even if they were doing that with the Couva Hospital, what about the National Enrichment Center at Castlefield? That center was also opened in 2015. A big event, a gala event. The media was there, special invited guests, millions spent. And after that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we came into government, the center could not be operationalized. And why? It wasn't built to specifications. It wasn't built to the design brief. There were flaws in the building. We had to have a structural assessment done. And we also had to effect repairs so that we could have gotten the necessary statutory approvals. So you opened a center, but it remained a construction site, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we persevered. And we were able to reopen, recommission that center in December 2018. And the persons with disabilities in this country now have use of that facility. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to touch a little bit on some of the statements made by the member for Couva South. Now, he spoke at length about job losses, and we are all very much aware that his figure must have been pulled out of the air and out of a hat, because he speaks in terms of 60,000 job losses. It is the government's understanding, based on data from approved organizations who are engaged in statistical data collection, that it is approximately about $21,000. No, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government empathizes with anyone who loses a job, because we know a job can mean bread and butter for families. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that in any country, once there's an economic downturn, there are job losses. So to suggest that this government was probably being spiteful or wicked and we just took away jobs, that is not so, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That nothing is further from the truth. In addition to which, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government was forced, because of the profligate spending of that administration, to do more with less. So it became necessary for us to make sure that we were getting value for money. So what did we do? We had to look at how we operated. For example, in the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, we have merged the food card program, which is the CCTP program, into the social welfare division, because it fits perfectly there. Because the field officers, when they go out to do assessments in terms of assessing persons for grants, it is the same actions that have to take place. So instead of having duplication of efforts, we have one officer with one single intake form doing one standard means test, and we can assess persons for almost every grant that the ministry provides. And that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is doing more with less and making the best use of our funds and getting value for money. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we also had a situation when we came into government where the previous administration, in some instances, for example, again at the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, they had parallel workforces. We had the social displacement unit, and they brought in the interagency unit. So you had two sets of employees doing the same jobs. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, with all due respect, when you did an assessment and you looked at it, that was simply to bring in persons that they wanted in the organization. It was not a case of there being different work to be done and additional persons being required. So yes, there were job losses, but in some instances, it was necessary because we had to do more with less, and we had to ensure that public funds were being spent where we were getting value for money. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I took serious umbrage when the member for Couva South would have indicated that our political leader, Dr. the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley, did not display leadership and visioning. Mr. Deputy Speaker, nothing is further from the truth. If we did not have a leader who displayed the right leadership qualities and skills and that visioning that was required, we would not have been able to turn around this economy. We would not have been able to function for the last 3.5 years and move Trinidad and Tobago slowly forward. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, again, as I say, on behalf of all of us on this side, we take serious umbrage with this statement, and it is totally incorrect. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the member for Couva South also spoke at length about a number and identified numerous projects that the previous administration would have been engaged in, and they would have constructed buildings, and they said it was all part of national development. But, Madam Speaker, I dare say yes, that the previous administration did engage in development. They did construct a lot of buildings, but that was a means to an end. That was a means of getting their hands on the public purse and spending in a most prolificate manner. There are projects, when we look at it now, that should have cost probably $50 million, that cost $100 million, in excess of $100 million. So yes, you all can be very proud that you have all of these centers up, but at what cost to the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Hundreds of millions of dollars, probably billions of dollars could have been better spent so that our citizenry could get better health care. Our social benefits could have been enhanced. We could have developed all of our highways. Our infrastructure could have been much greatly improved, but the intention was, it is not about the people of Trinidad and Tobago, it is about us. And every week they come into this parliament and stand and speak about, we did this, we did that, we did the other, but at what cost to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago? And Madam Speaker, I stand here this afternoon and I am saying to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we will never forget what they did. Never. Never. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will now get into my presentation. Yes. Madam Speaker, sorry. This government, People's National Government, is a caring government. We do everything that is within our power to ensure that we care for and take care of all citizens and residents of Trinidad and Tobago. And, Madam Speaker, because of this, the Prime Minister being very well aware that individuals and communities can feel disconnected from or forgotten by those who govern where there is inadequate communication or sharing of information. Because in the absence of information from those who govern, there's a feeling of alienation from the population, and there's discontent and dissatisfaction. So our Prime Minister, as the leader of government, he recognized that he has a duty and a responsibility to keep the population informed, aware, and educated. And so, Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister's Mind Your Business initiative, that came about because of the need to do that. And he has honored his responsibility to the population because he has done much to inform all citizens about our major national issues in a clear and succinct manner that was easily understood by persons at all social, economic, and educational levels. And so, Madam Speaker, we, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, were reminded that governance, the economy, and social issues are our business. So we need to be aware of what's happening, we need to pay attention, and we need to be informed. Because if we do not mind our business, somebody's going to mind it for us. And their agenda may not be in sync with ours, and so we could be easily misled. And, Madam Speaker, this government is going to continue to inform and educate and build awareness among the members of the population so that they cannot be easily misled and they will always know what is happening so they can make informed decisions. And so, Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister's approach of focusing on our recent past, our present circumstances, and plans for a better and brighter future, it resonated well with persons from all walks of life. Oh, as a matter of fact, there was overwhelming positive feedback from people, the population, all strata of society about the Prime Minister's presentation. And that has tremendously improved our knowledge and understanding of our circumstances. We now know why we are where we are and what are the government's plans for moving Trinidad and Tobago forward. Now, Madam Speaker, my colleagues who went before me would have done very well in treating with the issues of finances and the economy. They would have dealt with those in great detail. So there is no need for me to deal with that. I, Madam Speaker, will treat with the social issues. Now, this government has a commitment to care for and protect the poor and vulnerable in this society. And, Madam Speaker, once again, I'll say it because it has to be said over and over, because this is such a great thing. This government, despite our straitened economic circumstances, there has been no change whatsoever in the benefits, grants, and services provided by the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, there has been increases, and there are 176,840 persons who can attest to this because they receive a payment from us every month. Madam Speaker, there are currently 101,149 persons in receipt of the citizen pension. And with the change that was effected in the last budget, we now have 27,263 persons who have received an increase on their pension of either $500 or $1,000. And we have an additional 2,500 persons who are over 65 who will now benefit from that system, whereas they could not have benefited before. And that is due to the new band, where you have a band from $4,500 to $5,500, Madam Speaker. 27,150 persons also received an increase on their public assistance grant. Now, for some persons, $150 may not sound like much, but for persons who are living on the cusp of poverty, Madam Speaker, who are in vulnerable situations, $150 can mean for them groceries for a week. So they have welcomed this increase, and they are very happy with it. Persons in receipt of the disability grant have also received an increase of $200, and they have moved from $1,800 to $2,000. But even more importantly, Madam Speaker, children with disabilities, special needs children, they received a benefit either under public assistance or the special child's grant of $800. Now, this benefit is subject to a means test. So you often found that persons at the lower or middle income levels would not qualify based on the means test. But the cost of maintaining and caring for a child with a special needs could be very costly. Madam Speaker, in recognition of this, this government took the decision to remove the age eligibility from the disability grant, and children can now qualify for a disability grant without a means test of $1,500. Madam Speaker, that means $850 more in the hands of parents of children with special needs. And Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister in his address spoke about the social benefits. And this evening, I am here to emphasize some of them because we are all about building awareness and increasing the knowledge. So we still have the funeral grant of $7,000, and that grant is in most instances available on a same-day basis once you bring in your supporting documents. There is rental assistance for persons who are in vulnerable situations. They may be facing eviction, they have been the victim of a fire, or they may be living in a circumstance of domestic violence. And this grant is provided $2,500 for up to 6 months in the first instance. It then goes to $1,500 and then $1,000. So, Madam Speaker, persons in those circumstances can benefit from a rental assistance grant for up to 1 year. We also have the medical assistance grant of up to $7,500. Wheelchairs are provided. Last year, we provided 485 wheelchairs at a cost of $2.6 million. We also provide special beds. Madam Speaker, persons are not even aware, but there are persons can also benefit from this grant for the provision of dentures and eyeglasses. So, Madam Speaker, this government takes care of its citizens who are in vulnerable situations with almost everything. And Madam Speaker, I want to speak a little bit about disaster relief here. No, before I go to that, let me just mention the prosthetics. Prosthetics, our grants are normally up to $40,000, but in exceptional circumstances, for example, where you may have a double amputee, it can go to as much as $75,000. Madam Speaker, this grant is one that is becoming very important. The Minister of Health has been trying with making people become more aware of diseases such as diabetes, but we still have a high incidence of it, and every year we are having more and more persons having their limbs amputated. So this prosthetic grant is one of the things that help those persons to have a better quality of life. And Madam Speaker, here I just want to touch a little bit on disaster relief. Persons who may have been the victim of a disaster, either man-made or natural, there are a number of benefits. We have the household item grants, which is up to $10,000 to replace furniture that may have been lost, destroyed in that disaster. We have the clothing grant of $1,000 per person in the household, and then we have the school supplies grant of $1,000 for secondary school students and $750 for primary school students. Now, Madam Speaker, in terms of this disaster relief, this government, recognizing that persons who are the victims of disaster could be totally devastated because they may have lost everything, has always been assisting. Over the period October 2015 to February 2019, we would have paid out 831 grants at a cost of $5 million. With the after Brett in 2017, 1,643 households would have benefited to the value of $11,668,000. In October 2017, 1,105 persons would have benefited to the tune of $8.5 million. And then, Madam Speaker, in October 2018, we had unprecedented flooding in Trinidad and Tobago. Initially, our estimates were that approximately 3,500 persons would have been affected. It has turned out, Madam Speaker, that we have received applications for assessments from 9,526 persons. Checks have been printed for 8,452 persons at a cost of $114 million. And, Madam Speaker, the government, recognizing that this was a major catastrophe, would have done everything in its power to try to assist persons as speedily as possible, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, I think we were not very mindful of Jeremiah 17:9, which says that the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked or exceedingly corrupt. And, Madam Speaker, this is what we experience as a part of this whole flood exercise. The government, they are trying its best, expending huge sums of money that would not have even been budgeted for, was faced with situations of persons seeking to corrupt the process and corrupt the system. Madam Speaker, we at the ministry, recognizing this, we have requested an in-depth audit of the whole flood exercise. But in the interim, recognizing some of these situations, the fraud squad was called in, and thus far, 18 persons have been charged and are before the courts. So, Madam Speaker, this government has every intention to treat with corruption wherever we find it, and this is what would have been done in this situation. I also wish to indicate to the population that because of what has transpired, it has caused the ministry to do a verification of every remaining application and assessment that we have. and that is why the process has been taking a little longer. We also need to identify releases to pay the additional sum, which is estimated at probably another $40 million, Madam Speaker. So that is where we are in terms of the flood relief. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance would have amended the motion and he would have made mention of the profligate spending. And Madam Speaker, here I want to touch on something that tends to be a very sore point with the members on the other side, and it has to do with food support. Now, Madam Speaker, every so often they're accused of, you're always going back in the past and it's blame Kamla and blame the government. But it is not blaming when something was done and the facts are there. If it is someone would have gone in and would have spent $100 million when it was not necessary, I am not blaming by saying, I'm just simply stating the facts. And Madam Speaker, in this situation, in terms of the food support, they would have spent $64 million to put a biometric system in place. They employed 142 persons on that project just to simply call persons who were in receipt of the senior citizen pension and public assistance grants so that they can update the records. Madam Speaker, there is no way 142 persons are needed to be on the telephones calling persons with senior citizen pension or public assistance grant. And ad in the newspaper would have taken care of that adequately and they would have probably spent $10,000. But it is timing that is important, Madam Speaker. Those persons were brought on in 2015. What happened in 2015? The general elections. So the phone calls were more than calling persons about the senior citizen pension. And Madam Speaker, if you look at the salary cost involved in having 142 persons on board, there you'll see profligate spending. And so, Madam Speaker, when this government came in, we recognized what was happening. And we decided something had to be done because you had a system that was costing $29 million just for the financial platform every year. And only 2% of the persons in receipt of benefits were being paid on that system. Madam Speaker, that made no sense. And so we decided that we were going to, one, embark on a massive recertification exercise to determine how many of the 42,000 persons who were in receipt of the food card really were eligible for payment under the food card system. And we were also going to find a new, more cost-effective way to make the payments. And Madam Speaker, as a result of those exercises, as at today, 18,900 persons have been 18,900 persons have been found to either not be eligible for the food card or never came to be recertified. And that has resulted in a saving of $159 million, Madam Speaker. So they were very content to continue spending $159 million when that is money that could have come back into the Treasury for redistribution, either to health or to infrastructural development or to national security or to tourism. Madam Speaker, they did not care. And Madam Speaker, it is not simply, this government is not simply about, okay, so those persons no longer receive any food card, we stop. We have improved our targeting mechanism, and we are now sure that the majority of the persons in receipt of the food card are persons who are in need and are eligible, Madam Speaker. Yes. And we have added 6,810 deserving families to the program. Madam Speaker, profligate spending. Under the past administration, all MPs were allocated 50 temporary food cards per month, value $410. Madam Speaker, if you do a quick check on that, I think I worked a figure just now, that would have cost the government, I think, probably about $50 million over the 5-year period. Now, it is interesting because they may argue but the cards were given to people who deserved. 80% of the persons who were issued temporary food cards never applied for a permanent food card. That suggests, Madam Speaker, that those persons never were really in need and never were eligible for a food card. So we spent 80% of approximately $50 million on persons who did not deserve. That is profligate spending, Madam Speaker.
Like cash distribution.
Yes, that's correct.
Cash distribution.
And Madam Speaker, allow me now to speak a little bit about our work with the NGOs. The ministry partners with NGOs as we seek to enhance the quality of life of our most vulnerable in society. We have the hearing or visually impaired, we have the blind, we have the socially displaced, we have persons with disabilities, autistic children, cerebral palsy, and to a large extent, NGOs assist the government and the ministry in providing a service to those persons. And Madam Speaker, we currently partner with 24 NGOs. And this year we have budgeted $57,162,000 in subventions for those NGOs so that they can provide the service that is needed by the vulnerable in our society. The Lady Ho Choi Home, for example, we have budgeted $18 million. The Trinidad and Tobago Association for Hearing Impaired, $11,700,000. And the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association, $14 million, Madam Speaker. So this government is taking care of its people. We are taking care of the poor and vulnerable, and we will continue to do so. And that is what the Prime Minister went out there to explain to people. We have dealt with the financial aspect. We have dealt with the economy so that we can improve our social services. And Madam Speaker, anybody who does not want to hear that, then they do not have people and people's interests at heart. And Madam Speaker, very often they talk about, okay, tell us what you have done. Well, you all have been there for 4 years. You all have been incompetent. Madam Speaker, I think the people of Trinidad and Tobago, not I think, I know, the people of Trinidad and Tobago will be better off any day with what they term this incompetent government than that good government that they call themselves. Because we are very concerned about the interests of the people. We look at every dollar that we spend and we spend it with value for money in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, not for our friends and our families and for ourselves. And so, Madam Speaker, in an effort to improve service delivery within the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, we embark on public information and education sensitization session. And every year we ensure that we have at least one session in every constituency in Trinidad and Tobago. And we are continuing this year. Right now we are in the process of having...
Whereas your original speaking time is now spent, you're entitled to 15 more minutes extended time. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the House do now adjourn to Friday, the 8th day of March at 1:30 p.m. At that time, Madam Speaker, we will do Bill number 2 on the order paper and act to amend the Companies Act.
Honourable members, the question is that this House now do adjourn to Friday, the 8th of March, 2019 at 1:30 p.m. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to Friday, 8th March, 2019 at 1:30 p.m.